At dawn on the 7th, the imperial proclamation was read to the French ranks, which inflamed these noble hearts, and which will inspire noble hearts from all countries of all ages. "Soldiers," the emperor said, "here is the battle which you have so desired. From now the victory depends on you. It is necessary to us. It will bring us an abundance of good winter quarters and a swift return to our country. Behave as at Austerlitz, Friedland, Weissach, Smolensk, and let the latest posterity recount with the pride of our deeds this day. Let them say of you, he was at the great battle beneath the walls of Moscow." The soldiers replied with joyful cries. They told Napoleon, "Be assured, today we have all sworn to win, and we will win." The right flank of the French army, made up of Campen's and Decisive's divisions, were to attack the Redans to the south of Semenovsko, the enemy's left flank. In order to achieve this goal, it was compelled to cross through half a mile of extremely difficult terrain. It passed along the edge of the woods, preceded by its artillery. At halfway, it encountered a ravine occupied by Russian Jaegers, supported by Borodino's first line. Under terrible artillery fire, Campen's attacked the enemy fortifications. Decisive followed after him. These brave divisions crossed through the ravine and fell on the first enemy line. They pursued them with bayonets and attacked the second line. This latter was not able to stand up to their effort. The Redans were taken by the first troops, which in their turn were driven out. Upon receiving support, they again occupied the fortifications. Our division suffered terrible losses from the very beginning of the battle. In a quarter of an hour, Davout, Campen's, Decisive, Dupelin were all wounded, as was Rapp, who had come to replace Campen's. The wounds of the commanders did not calm the fervor of the soldiers, but they upset the direction of the movement. The enemy's attack on the village of Borodino was carried out with incredible speed, but the bravery of the Life Guard Jaeger Regiment, inspired by the example of its commanders, halted the advance of 8,000 Frenchmen. The bloody battle intensified, and these brave Jaegers held the enemy for more than an hour, witnessed by the entire army. Finally, the enemy's reserves, which had arrived, strengthened his force and forced this regiment to leave the village of Borodino and cross behind the river Kolak. The French, encouraged by taking Borodino, pursued the Jaegers and almost crossed the river with them. But the Guard Jaegers, reinforced by Colonel Monatkin's regiments and the Jaegers Brigade of the 24th Division under the command of Colonel Buick, suddenly turned against the enemy and together with the reinforcements attacked with bayonets. And all the French who had crossed to our bank were the victims of their daring enterprise. The bridge on the river Volga was completely destroyed despite heavy enemy fire, and for the whole day, the French did not dare to attempt to cross and satisfied themselves with exchanging fire with our Jaegers. Meanwhile, the fire on our left wing intensified hour by hour. In this sector, the enemy had gathered his main forces, made up of the corps of Prince Poniatowski, Marshal Ney, and Davout, and significantly outnumbered us. Prince Bagration, seeing the enemy's increasing numbers, summoned the 3rd Infantry Division under the command of Lieutenant General Konovenitsyn, and moreover was forced to use the 2nd Grenadier Division from the reserves under the command of Lieutenant General Borozdin, which he placed in an echelon formation across the left wing behind the village. And further to the left, 3 regiments of the 1st Cuirassier Division and the entire 2nd Cuirassier Division. I found it necessary to bring regiments closer to this sector. The Life Guard Izmailovsky Regiment and the Litovsky under the command of Colonel Krapovetsky. At 8 o'clock, Murat's division, which formed the extreme right of the 4th Corps, was fiercely attacked as it prepared to advance on the redoubt, a movement which was supposed to be supported by Gerard's division. General Murat, in order to hold back the enemy's lines, detached the 30th Regiment on the left to seize the redoubt. This position was captured through a great demonstration of valor. Our batteries duly occupied the heights and retained the advantage which the Russians had had for more than 2 hours. The parpettes turned against us during the attack were now turned in our favor. The battle was lost for the enemy, who did not think it had started. In this extremity, Prince Kutuzov did not despair in the fate of his country. To save it and to support a reputation acquired by half a century of service, he harangued the generals, revived the soldiers, and renewed the combat, attacking with all his troops the strong position he had just lost. 300 of our pieces of cannon placed on this high ground bore down on these masses, and their vanquished soldiers came to die at the foot of these ramparts, which they had erected and which they had regarded as if it were the street in Moscow, their holy and sacred city. Despite Russian artillery fire, the enemy division advanced. Although we were outnumbered by the enemy, I successfully held off the enemy's assault. Finally, the superiority of their numbers forced me to withdraw in order to reform my depleted regiment. General Bonamy's 30th Line Regiment at the head of Moran's division broke into our lines. He was supported by the entire division, but at this moment, under the cover of the Ufa Regiment led by Count Kutuzov, I reorganized my division again and charged at the enemy with the 18th Jaeger Regiment. I recall the terrible sight that appeared before me during the struggle for the main battery. The 19th and 40th Jaeger Regiments attacked the enemy from the left flank. General Veselekov and several regiments of the 12th Division fell upon them from the right flank. The 30th French Regiment was almost completely destroyed. General Bonamy was taken into captivity. The remainder of his regiment was driven back towards Moran's division. I led the remaining regiments of the 12th Division, went behind the redoubt and cut off the French troops I found there. Reinforced by cavalry attacks, our powerful offensive demonstrations threw Moran's division into disarray. Thus, we regained the control of the redoubt within a quarter of an hour. This struggle was one of the most terrible and bloody during the whole of the Battle of Borodino. The bodies of the enemy piled up in the redoubt in front of the fortifications. From our side, General Kutuzov was killed, a horse was killed from under me, and another wounded. I arrived at an ambulance where I was aggrieved to see Prince Bagration sitting on the grass, surrounded with many medical officers and his aide-de-camp. He was wounded, his leg was bare and wily. The Emperor's surgeon was busy extracting a ball which had entered his leg bone. He suffered much, but accepted it with heroism. Upon seeing me, he asked me, "How is General Barclay? Tell him that the fate of the army is in his hands. Everything is going well so far." He noticed that I was also wounded. "Ah," he said, "go and get bandaged." I left him with regret. He fought valiantly on the left wing. The main attacks were directed against him. Unfortunately, the prince was mortally wounded. General Tuchkov, the same. Count Vorontsov, who commanded the Grenadiers, and Count de Saint-Priest were also out of action. We saw before our ranks of enemy cavalry. This was Latour-Maubourg's cavalry. Napoleon, temporarily enthused by the capture of Semenovskoy's flèches, ordered Murat and Nansousti and Latour-Maubourg's cavalry corps to decide the battle against us. From the Cheverodino redoubt, he enthusiastically shouted, "There they go! There they go!" The large swarm threatened to rout us, crashed against the squares of our Izmailowski and Lithuanian Guards regiment, and was then defeated by the Guards battery of His Imperial Majesty and Count Arkachev, together with part of the 1st Light Company. Another cavalry attack was launched but met with the same fate. The cavalry which appeared before us was preparing for a third attempt. The enemy bravely advanced at a slow trot straight towards the menacing battery awaiting it. But once the enemy cavalry was no more than 300 meters from the battery, which was already preparing to fire, the cavalry returned to both sides and presented a light horse battery which it had been hidden behind it, already detached from its limber. Both sides began to fire at the same time. The inevitable confusion temporarily reigned over the battery amidst canister at such close quarters. Several men and horses were taken out of action.